Throughout Disney's immense catalog of stories, the theme of transformation has been continually used and reused to an incredible degree. From Cinderella's transformation from a peasant girl into a glittering princess to Mulan's transformation into the hero of her nation, the art of the transformation has helped convey the idea that change is always possible and essential for a character's growth. That said, across the many worlds of Kingdom Hearts that our gang journeys through, the idea of transformation has seemingly taken a more subtle approach. With Riku, for instance, changing from a competitive friend to a full-blown antagonist by the end of Monstro as one of the only examples that this idea is even here. That is, until Atlantica, where Sora, Donald, and Goofy all physically transform into different creatures, and bringing this thought into the forefront of the game and our minds. Which, given the context of this world, transformation is extremely essential, as Ariel's original story emphasizes the transformative act of her becoming a human and a part of their world. What's more is that the mythology behind this world helps explain why creatures like mermaids and our understanding of them have seen some incredible and notable transformations since their inception thousands of years ago. So, what do you say we dive into this world and explore this kingdom under the sea? As always, a huge shout out and thank you to all of you who support the channel through Patreon, Twitch, and YouTube. For more info on how you can help show your support, be sure to stay till the end. As we finish out Monstro, we'll land right back at Agrabah, where we can choose to either go down the left-hand path or the right path. Heading down the right path this time around, we'll find ourselves steering towards probably the most divisive world in all of Kingdom Hearts. And no matter which side of the argument you stand on, I think we can all agree that this world has one of the more unique introductions. Splashing into this world, our gang is physically transformed into sea creatures befitting their role within the series. Donald the Mage as an octopus, Goofy the Soldier as a sea turtle, and Sora the Red Mage all-arounder as a dolphin. I'll go into further detail on their depictions later on, but this opening portion of Atlantica gives us a chance to get used to how this world operates and what adjustments we'll need to make here. Although fighting is severely limited here, thankfully, our magic is much more powerful against the Heartless of this world. After meeting with Ariel and fending off some of the Heartless, we're able to explore the many sections of this world. And, to be honest, I actually love how open these sections are. They express just how open the ocean can be, and how some places can resemble an unknown or alien civilization. Thankfully, the beginning of Atlantica simply requires us to follow the Trident markers to reach our next destination.
That was too close. As long as I have my trident, I will not tolerate those creatures inside this palace.
Daddy?
Oh, Ariel! When will you listen? It's dangerous out there. Strange creatures lurk outside.
Behold, you swim before the ruler of the seas, His Majesty King Triton.
And who are they?
They helped us fight off those creatures.
They don't look familiar.
We're from an ocean very far away.
Yup, we came to find the keyhole.
The what?
What's that?
Well, it's a...
There's no such thing, certainly not here.
But Daddy...
This cutscene always struck a chord with me, as outside of the villains themselves, we've never seen a Disney World character have such a strong reaction to the mention of a keyhole, leading to the thought that Triton may know more about our journey than we do. Following this introduction, we head into Ariel's grotto and find that it's nearly part for part with Disney's version, with small treasures, candelabras, and a music box that really make this small grotto feel lived in. However, it's also here that we're introduced to Ursula and her poopsies, Flotsam and Jetsam, all three plotting and planning to not only take down the gang and prevent them from finding the keyhole, but also King Triton, wanting him gone so she can rule the Seven Seas. Outside of the grotto, we come across our first real challenge of this world, and I want you to guess what we need to do next to progress the story. Is it A, go to the palace, B, go into the undersea valley, or is it C, interact with this random-ass dolphin that takes us nowhere? Well, if you guessed C, then you are correct. Congratulations! To progress into the story, we need to head back into the undersea valley to do some more exploring. However, to do that, we need to go up through the undertow. However, we can't do that without having our dolphin friend help us get there, who, for some reason, won't show up if you don't interact with him in this first area where we first meet him. You can see a bit of why this is one of the more divisive worlds. That said, if we hitch a ride on our dolphin friend here, and then in the undersea valley, we'll go upstream and towards probably the coolest set piece of this world. The sunken ship is a graveyard of sorts. It's the definition of the phrase show, don't tell. It gives us questions like, what happened to result in this being here? How long has it been here? And why does it have a chest containing the crystal trident? Questions that are never fully explored, but they don't really need to be, as our imagination fills in the gaps to help tell the story. Also, did I mention that there's a shark here? Heading back into Ariel's grotto with the crystal trident in hand, we're provided another cutscene of Triton absolutely losing it after seeing this strange item, resulting in this incredible moment.
Young man, you're not from another ocean. You're from another world, aren't you?
Huh?
Then you must be the key bearer.
How did you know?
You may fool Ariel, but you can't fool me. You don't know your dorsal fin from your tail. As the key bearer, you must already know one must not meddle in the affairs of other worlds.
Of course I know that, but...
You have violated this principle. The key bearer shatters peace and brings ruin.
Oh, Sora's not like that.
I thank you for saving my daughter.
Much like with the mention of the keyhole, this is the first time a resident of a Disney World actively recognizes the Keyblade and acknowledges what a key bearer is. It's shocking to say the least, pun intended, that someone like Triton would be so vehemently against the Keybearer when we've done nothing but save the worlds and fight off the darkness. It really makes us question whether our path with the Keyblade is the right one, and what Triton could really mean by the Keybearer shattering peace and bringing ruin. Unfortunately, Triton's outburst towards Ariel has her understandably emotional, which results in her foolishly trusting Ursula, who convinces Ariel to sneak into the palace at night and steal her father's trident. With this, King Triton is weakened, which gives Ursula a tentacle up on us, getting her one step closer to finding the keyhole and controlling the Seven Seas with darkness. At this point, if you've never played through Atlantica before, this is where you'd undoubtedly get lost in your progression through the story, as there's no clear path as to where we need to go next. We know we need to stop Ursula, but where could she have gone? Where could she be hiding? Well, if we make it back to the undersea valley, we'll find our dolphin friend swimming around just like before. And with him, he can take us up through the undertow and back to the sunken ship. In all honesty, I remember the first time playing through this part and getting terribly stuck, trying to figure out where I was supposed to go for a solid hour, because I just refused to ride the dolphin back to the sunken ship. Because why would I? But making our way there and quickly swatting away Glut the shark, just like before, we'll find a hidden switch by some debris that opens up a path into Ursula's hideout. The path through the tidal abyss is so eerie, and I love it. A path that leads into Ursula's lair that just feels like we're slowly descending into the depths, like Dante in his trip through hell. Once inside the Sea Witch's lair, we'll have to get through one of the more difficult boss fights we've had to face yet. Even on easier modes, if you're not paying attention, you can easily be knocked out by Ursula's spin attack, or by one of her poopsies. The primary method for dealing damage is through her cauldron, or more specifically, the magic of the cauldron. Once she's dropped a bottle into it, unload a volley of fire spells until it explodes. This will stun her long enough for you to get enough damage in, and after 3 times, or if her health drops down to 0, you'll win the fight. Yay! With Ursula defeated and her poopsies up in smoke, we'll be rewarded with the new Mermaid Kick ability, where we can now swim at a much faster rate, meaning that we're now able to swim against the current of the undertow without much issue. Something that I like about this moment as well is the fact that if we do swim back to the undertow, we'll find ourselves looking towards the exact place where we need to go next. And thanks to our new ability, we can get there with ease.
You pathetic fools! I rule the seas now! The sea and all its spoils bow to my power!
This boss battle still haunts me to this day. It's this fight that I dread when playing through the harder difficulties, as Ursula's lightning attacks, hyper beam, and sucking attack can really pack a serious wallop. It's a boss battle that practically forces you to play like you're in Dark Souls or in Devil May Cry, constantly repositioning to avoid attacks while dealing as much damage as possible. That is, if you're fighting her face to face. See, the trick here is to move yourself behind her head, and thanks to her always turning to try to face you, you can button mash the attack button as much as you'd like as you avoid a fair amount of Ursula's Thundaras. However, after a certain point, she'll start to use Thundaga around her to deal some massive damage, which means you'll need to swim back and forth between these attacks until you eventually defeat her, where she dissolves and leaves nothing but the trident behind. With the Sea Witch gone and the trident reclaimed, we're gifted an upgrade to our Thunderspell and the 3rd Ansem report, leading to our final task of the world. With the trident in hand, we quickly swim back to Ariel's grotto and use the trident to reveal the keyhole, sealing it shut for good and finishing out this world, gifting us the new Keyblade, the Crab Claw. And now, with Atlantica's story finished, there's still so much more we need to learn about and explore through Ariel's original story, The Little Mermaid. Written and published in 1837, Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid is just one of many poems and short stories the Danish writer produced within his compendium of fairy tales. Focusing primarily on the love-crossed adventure of a young mermaid, the story itself explores themes of transformation, identity, self-sacrifice, and the pains of love. Themes that, as we'll soon see, express what it truly means to be human. Our story begins in the deepest part of the ocean, where the Sea King and his 6 daughters live and play inside their castle of pearl and coral. And as each of the daughters love to collect objects of the human world above them, our little mermaid has a fascination with the marble statue of a young man and tends to her red flowers that surround it, often finding herself staring at the statue for minutes on end. But as she is the youngest sister, she isn't allowed to see the world above until her 15th birthday. And as she is only about 9 or 10 at this point in the story, this means that as each year passes, the Little Mermaid only hears about how each of her sister's adventures above the surface of the water are filled with the most wondrous things. Tales of the passing ships with tons of men climbing all over them, wide rivers that lead into serene lakes, and beautiful towns full of two-legged people and wondrous music. When it was finally the Little Mermaid's time, she rose to the surface and found a large ship that sat calmly in the water. She curiously peeked inside from the ship's windows and saw a group of people merrily laughing, dancing, and playing music, all in celebration. As she watched them with glee, she found that they were celebrating the birthday of the handsome prince of the nearby kingdom, and she fell head over fin for the young man. However, she loses track of time, and before she realizes it, a vicious storm has swept over the ship and rocks it violently, capsizing it deep within the ocean. Thankfully, the prince is rescued by the Little Mermaid and is brought back to his kingdom, laying him down on the beach to be found by the castle's assistants. But right before he is found, she quickly kisses him and swims away, watching from the rocks as he awakens. Over time, the Little Mermaid often spent her free time swimming to the surface to catch glimpses of the prince and the world above her own, wanting desperately to join that world. In this desire to know more about the human world and the humans themselves, she learns from her grandmother that humans typically only live for a third of what mermaids can before they die. In turn, humans are granted eternal life thanks to the soul that they possess. She learns as well that mermaids unfortunately don't possess a soul, and instead turn into sea foam when they die and become one with the sea. Her grandmother continues, saying that for her to gain a soul, a human must truly fall in love with her and marry her for her to be able to gain a share of his soul, allowing her to join him in the afterlife. Even with this explanation and her grandmother's warnings, the Little Mermaid wanted nothing more than to join her prince and gain a soul. Fortunately for her, she knew of someone who could help her and traveled far outside of her father's kingdom to find her. It doesn't take her long until the Little Mermaid arrives at the Sea Witch's lair, to which the Sea Witch surprisingly knows exactly why the young girl is here, and decides to make a potion for the young mermaid, giving her clear instructions to swim up to the beach before sunrise the next day and then drink the potion. The Sea Witch warns her, however, that with her new legs, each step that she takes will feel like she is walking on sharp knives and glass. She warns as well that if she can win the prince over, she will never be able to return to the sea, nor return to her family. However, if she is unsuccessful, then she will die from heartbreak and dissolve into the ocean. As payment for such an auspicious gift, the Sea Witch asks simply for the Little Mermaid's voice, preventing her from using her beautiful voice to easily sway the young prince. And as the Little Mermaid agrees to the Sea Witch's terms, the young girl's tongue is suddenly cut off, and she quickly swims off with the potion to make it to land in time. As she reaches the surface, she drinks the potion and feels an excruciating pain coursing throughout her body, a pain so powerful that she passes out from it. Fortunately, the potion doesn't kill her, and when she comes to, she finds the prince watching over her in fascination. And when she looks down, she notices that her fin is gone, and what remains are her two new legs. The prince takes her up to the castle and finds the Little Mermaid gorgeous. And as she notices this, the young girl proceeds to dance for the prince as his slaves sing for both of them. This only furthers the prince's fascination with the once Little Mermaid, and over time, she becomes the prince's closest companion and confidant. The prince even admits to her that he is in love with a young mermaid who rescued him on his birthday, not realizing that the girl before him was that mermaid. This news gives the Little Mermaid hope that they will be together, but unfortunately, she soon learns that the king and queen have arranged for the prince to be married to another maiden from a neighboring kingdom. This, of course, upsets both of them, and the prince even admits that he'd much rather marry his closest confidant, the Little Mermaid, instead, kissing her before they sail off to the neighboring kingdom for his arranged marriage. They soon arrive at the kingdom a few days later and get to meet the young princess that the prince is arranged to marry. But seeing her, the prince recognizes her as that woman who saved his life on his birthday, not realizing that it was really his closest companion who was, in fact, his savior once again. The next day, the prince and the princess are married, and both kingdoms cheer, rejoice, and celebrate the happy couple. However, only one, the Little Mermaid, feels the physical and emotional pain of heartbreak. Knowing that this is her last night of her young life, the Little Mermaid sits on the edge of the ship and looks out to the sea, crying softly to herself as she waits for her death. But before the sun rises, she finds her sisters are there together in the water in front of her, pleading for her to return home, telling her that they had cut off their own hair and made a deal with the Sea Witch to help bring their young sister back home with them. But to do so, she would need to stab the prince in the heart with the Sea Witch's knife, saving her own life while taking his. As she entered his cabin on the ship, she readied herself to kill him, but as she looked at him, she found him and his bride sleeping so very peacefully. The Little Mermaid stood there for a brief moment, wanting to stab the prince, thinking of it, but she couldn't bring herself to end his life, instead throwing the knife, then herself deep into the ocean, expecting to turn into the sea foam as her grandmother had described to her so long ago. But as the Little Mermaid lay in the water, she didn't feel herself dissolve as she thought she would, but instead found herself floating high into the sky, discovering that she had joined the Daughters of the Air, former mermaids and spirits who help many across numerous continents to accomplish good deeds. She learns that through helping others with good deeds, she would then be rewarded with a soul of her own after 300 years, and be able to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Finding happiness with this new life, the Little Mermaid then went back down to the prince and the princess as they slept, and kissed them both goodbye, joining the other daughters for good in search of young boys and girls to help in their journey in life, so that they all may enter into the kingdom of heaven. So, as you've probably noticed, Andersen's story of The Little Mermaid is an incredibly tragic tale that portrays themes of transformation and self-sacrifice. That changing oneself at the cost of giving up a literal piece of yourself doesn't always get you what you want. Though self-sacrifice isn't exactly illustrated here in Atlantica, the concept of transformation instead takes the center stage, both here in this world and within its mythology. And I don't think there's any better place to start than with the gang's entrance into Atlantica, with Sora taking on the form of a dolphin, Goofy as a sea turtle, and Donald as an octopus. And as I stated earlier, each of the gang is meant to represent their respective job within the party. Moreover, each of their transformations actually plays into the mythology behind each of these characters' transformations. Starting with Sora, his transformation sees him becoming a dolphin merman, which solidifies his comment about being from somewhere far away, as there is distinctly no one else in Atlantica who has a dolphin-like bottom half. Dolphins in myth make a prominent appearance within Greek mythology, as they are seen as the guides for sailors on their journeys throughout the Mediterranean, serving as well as stewards and servants of Poseidon, the god of the oceans. Oftentimes, dolphins would be associated with childlike wonder and innocence, as well as protection for sea gods, nymphs, and even sailors. All of which translates into why Sora is portrayed as a dolphin merman instead of the usual fish appearance like everyone else, as he acts not only as a mediator and messenger between characters, but also actively protects and sometimes even unknowingly guides characters like Ariel and Triton into seeing the truth of their world and the strength that comes from togetherness. Of course, the Mediterranean isn't the only place to have dolphins, as other cultures like the Maori, and even within Chinese folklore, dolphins have had a variety of different interpretations. For the Maori, they saw the Taniwha as powerful spirits and beings that inhabited the oceans, rivers, and deep pools. Existing there, they would oftentimes take on the form of a dolphin to protect and maintain the splendor of the waters. As for Chinese folklore, they had a story of a young girl who ran away from her evil stepfather and dove into the Yangtze River to escape his wrath. From this action, she transformed into a Baiji Dolphin and became the goddess of the Yangtze, a protector and peacemaker of the river. As for Goofy, his transformation into a sea turtle, more than likely a green sea turtle, is befitting of his role as he is the protector of the group. We can see this in a multitude of cultures, as some believe that the shell on the back of sea turtles acted as a sort of shield to help ward off any potential dangers. In ancient Hawaiian belief, for instance, the god of war Ku or Akua was said to have been able to take on the form of a sea turtle and use his shell as a shield to protect both islanders and fish alike from harm. Additionally, Goofy's primary stat is strength, which furthers and connects him to the thought of sea turtles as symbols of strength and protection. That said, one of the more prominent depictions of sea turtles is that of the holder of the world. Also known as the cosmic turtle within Hinduism, the turtles Kurma and synonymously Akupara were such turtles that had once held up the world on their backs, with both acting as avatars of the god of preservation, Vishnu. For Kurma, it's believed that during the primordial age, Vishnu had transformed into Kurma and helped the Devas hold up the mountains in order to restore and maintain the natural order, as many of them had been poisoned and were slowly losing their power. As for Akupara, it's thought that the turtle held 4 elephants on its back in each cardinal direction, with the world being as flat as a disc on the back of those elephants. This depiction may have even led to some believing that the universe was the turtle itself, with the lower portion of the body being the ground, the inside of the shell being where the humans lived, and the top of the shell being the sky or heavens. But this kind of idea isn't too far off from many indigenous beliefs who referred to the continent as Turtle Island, with one story from the Lenape people sharing that before the continent had taken shape, there was only the primordial waters, and to create the land, the turtle had a toad bring soil from the depths up to that turtle. And as more and more dirt was placed onto that turtle's shell, the amassing soil over time created the North American continent, and the home for many of the indigenous tribes. These stories, though seemingly different, all share a distinct fact that the turtle represented strength, protection, and prosperity for many cultures around the world. So it's extremely fitting to see our tank here take on the form of a sea turtle. As for Donald, I'd actually like to save him for later, as there's another character here in Atlantica that shares his new look and his affinity for magic. But going from our trio's entrance and into the expansive zones of this world, I think discussing this world itself is in order, as the name Atlantica is, surprisingly, a real place that did exist. Okay, not so much a place you can visit, but an ancient continent that existed during the Proterozoic eon, over 2 billion years ago. when South America and Africa were joined together in what we now know today as the Atlantic Ocean, which was more than likely named after the kingdom under the sea in Disney's The Little Mermaid, as its naming wasn't made official until 1996, just 7 years after the Disney's box office hit. Unsurprisingly, The Little Mermaid's Atlantica is really based off of the mythical city of Atlantis, a massive city and landmass that Plato mentions in 2 of his works, Timaeus and Critias. In these, Plato states that Atlantis was an extremely prominent empire within the Western world that sat just past the Strait of Gibraltar. Being essentially a superpower, the Atlantean Empire was said to have had control over much of the western half of the Mediterranean, as well as parts of Egypt and Libya, ruling over them with their military power. As for the foundation of the Atlantean Empire, Plato explains that as the world had formed and people populated the many islands and regions of the known world, each Olympian was given their own region to preside over and become a patron to. Plato unfortunately doesn't go into much detail on which gods presided over what, but he does note that it was Poseidon who was given both the oceans of the world as well as the Atlantean island. He continues by sharing that the capital, the city of Atlantis, sat at the center of the empire and was comprised of concentric circles, where each circle utilized the flowing water for travel as well as fishing. Additionally, the landscape that surrounded the city itself was fertile and beautiful, providing a view of the natural world that rivaled even that of Elysium. To listeners and readers alike, this empire is presented as a utopia of culture, agriculture, aquaculture, economic, and even military power, showing that an empire that can respect the land and the sea is a superpower that the gods could be in favor of. However, this favor would soon diminish as the Atlantean Empire became overly ambitious and hungry with power to control more of the Mediterranean. As Plato explains it, Atlantis had gone to war with an ancient Athens, which displeased the gods of Olympus, as Athens was one of their primary seats of power and could never be destroyed nor taken over so aggressively. In response, Poseidon rocked the island of Atlantis with massive earthquakes, breaking apart the land and causing equally massive waves to crash into the island, completely decimating the population and sinking the entire empire to the bottom of the ocean. Ultimately, this story of Atlantis and even its war with Athens was meant to share with listeners and readers alike how the hubris of a single nation can devastate the landscape that provides so much for its people, that even a utopia can easily fall apart if it loses touch with what it's really meant to be, a representation of its people and its ideals for the betterment of man and that of nature. Themes that Plato alludes to, with Athens subsequently surpassing the Atlantean Empire after its fall. This is because, in Plato's eyes, Athens existed as a true republic, where the people were the state and all equally decided the fate of the empire. This kind of hubris and loss of a once great world is seen here in Atlantica, as many of the areas we can explore feel empty and lost, slowly falling apart just like the boards of a sunken ship. This is furthered by the tridents we need to follow to make it to the palace of King Triton, as there are no other discernible landmarks in the vast majority of Atlantica, as it's devoid of all proper populace, sharing with us that Atlantica was once a great and prosperous nation that has since lost its way as a utopia. And no better is this exemplified than with the king of Atlantica himself, King Triton. Meeting King Triton for the first time is undoubtedly a shocking experience, pun intended, as we see him scold Ariel for swimming out into the depths. We witness his personality and an attitude that expertly parallels with his Disney adaptation as an overly protective father trying his best to protect what he has left in this world. Of course, there's a lot more to this character here in Atlantica that takes inspiration from his mythology and even his duty as a father. Originating from Greek mythology, Triton is a sea god, much like his father Poseidon, and was primarily viewed as his herald, as well as that of Oceanus, the titan of rivers and seas. With his conch shell trumpet, Triton proclaimed their presence to those in the sea of their arrival, or even the actions that they took within the oceans. Personally, I like to think that this massive conch shell outside of Triton's palace is actually meant to be his trumpet from his original mythology. But that's just me. Speaking of connections, both Triton of Greek myth and King Triton here in Atlantica are depicted as mermen, with the bottom half of their body being the back half of a fish. What's surprising with this is that depictions of mermaids were not entirely common during the classical period of Greece, with only Triton and Nereus, the old man of the sea, being depicted as that anthropomorphic human with a fish body. But I'll be going over that fact and mermaids a little bit more later on. Looking further into Triton's look, it's recorded in multiple sources that Triton, the sea god, had different appearances during the classical period and even shortly thereafter, with some portraying him as an older man with a beard to a younger man with flowing locks and black hair. This is more than likely due to his stories being told during different time periods, but could have also been a result of differing regions depicting the sea god to better fit their views. One example of this lies with the Roman poet Ovid, who portrayed the sea god as an old man with a beard, having his shoulders covered in barnacles or shells, having green hair, and as well a cerulean fish tail. This is important as at this point in time, Roman belief had already adopted Poseidon or Neptune as their god of the oceans, alongside other river gods such as Achilles, providing an easier way to differentiate Triton from other sea and river gods as to avoid any potential confusion. As for the trident that King Triton famously wields, I was unfortunately only able to find one source that mentions Triton and his use of the trident. In his work, The Nature of the Gods, the Roman statesman Cicero stated that Triton showed off his power with his trident by lifting up massive cliff faces or crags with ease. I'll add though that along with Triton wielding the trident, his father, Poseidon, is often portrayed wielding one himself. This was more than likely another way to physically represent the god during the time of his cult worship, as many of the gods during Greece's classical age shared similar appearances. Moreover, the trident was effective in portraying Triton and Poseidon, as the trident was more predominantly used for hunting fish, showing the connection to the sea. So this is really a curious aspect of Triton's mythology, and it may be a subtle thing, but it's always struck me curious as to why Triton would have the power of electricity as a sea god. The simple reason for this is because of Poseidon, who was not only the god of the oceans, but also that of earthquakes, horses, and more importantly, storms, as many of the storms over the seas often had lightning and thunder present within them, making many soldiers pray and provide offerings to Poseidon to potentially give them a safer voyage across the sea. We know this as with Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus and his crew failed to make a sacrifice or a proper patronage to Poseidon on their way home from Troy, and ended up angering the god. This resulted in Poseidon causing violent storms to erupt and forcing Odysseus and his crew to make a long 2-decade journey. Speaking of Odysseus, his journey through the Mediterranean would see him and his crew encounter a plethora of monsters and prominent figures throughout Greek mythology. What's more is that one of these encounters would help in the forming of the mermaids that we know of today. However, before we can explore that, we need to explain the origins of mermaids, as the depiction of a half-human and half-fish dates back even farther than you may realize. Probably the most important aspect of Atlantica is that of the mermaids and mermen, who haven't always been depicted as fair-skinned humans with fishtails. Surprisingly, their origins actually trace back to ancient Mesopotamia, with creatures known as Kulullu and the Abkalu. Often portrayed as a half-man, half-fish, the Kulullu was a mythical monster born from the primordial waters of Tiamat, also known as the mother of gods and monsters. Within Mesopotamian belief, the Kulullu was seen as a benevolent demon of the natural world who was frequently associated with the knowledge and wisdom of the ancient waters. Moreover, the Assyrians would later change this demon to the Kuliltu, or fish woman, while continuing their belief of the monster being a force of benevolence and wisdom. As for the Abkalu, they were anthropomorphized people who were seen as demigods of Mesopotamia, sages who guided the kings of old to prosperity, while providing ancient and divine wisdom that was given to them by the gods. Though not all of them were depicted as half fish and half man, some were depicted as half birds. Funnily enough, the Abkalu were believed to be the progenitors of tales of the Nephilim within Abrahamic belief. Of course, these tales of the Abkalu and the Kulullu would be recontextualized over time, and many cultures would become influenced by these creatures into creating their own versions to fit into their belief systems. And no better is this seen than with the sirens of Greek myth. First appearing in Homer's Odyssey sometime during the 7th century BCE, the sirens were sea nymphs who were depicted as beautiful and fair-skinned maidens with the body of a bird. It's believed that these chimeras of beauty and violence sat near the island of Aiaia and sang to sailors who passed too close to their nests, enticing the sailors to sail directly towards their voices, causing the ships to crash into the rocky islets and supply the sirens with a fresh meal. However, during Odysseus's voyage, he and his men needed to sail directly by the nests of these sirens, and to save them, Odysseus ordered his men to fill their ears with cloth and beeswax so that they would not be able to hear the sirens' captivating calls. In doing so, Odysseus also instructed his men to tie him to the mast so that he would be the only living human to hear their songs and live to tell the tale. As the story goes, they passed by the cliffs, and Odysseus writhed and shouted at his men to free him so that he could join the sirens, but they continued on past them, and thankfully, not a single man was lost to the sirens' call. It's these creatures that, over time, would make sailors wary of any sultry sounds that they might hear while sailing the seas. Be it through the Mediterranean or the Atlantic, the songs of the sirens would meld with the idea of fish-like people of Mesopotamia, becoming much more apparent 1,000 years later during the medieval period, as more and more people began to sail the oceans. With this expansion of the known world, sailors would begin to see a plethora of ocean mammals that they were unfamiliar with, such as dugongs and dolphins that swam beside their ships. Sometimes calling out in excitement or leaping along the wake of the ships, these mammals had many believe that a mermaid was swimming beside their ship. Whether they were singing to them or warning them, they were never really sure. Instead, found these creatures to be so fascinating that the ancient beliefs of sirens and half-fish people soon became a new legend of their own. Nevertheless, much like their bird-like counterparts, mermaids would have associations with death and malevolent omens for sailors, with many believing that those who had fallen overboard and hadn't resurfaced were lost to the sea, taken by the mermaids, and killed just as the sirens had killed many within the classical world. Stories like these would continue to grow to the point that shipwrecks along jagged coasts and islets were believed to have been caused by the mermaids who had swum with the ships and sang to her crew. Furthering this belief, this made the masses think that a supernatural force was behind the damage and the loss of life. Now, the thing I really find interesting with the tales of the mermaids, man, I'm on a roll with these puns, is that the majority of these mermaids have been viewed as beautiful women who drive men to their deaths while out at sea, producing the belief that the mermaid was a temptress of the ocean. This isn't too far off from creatures like the Lamia of Greek belief, who were sometimes seen as a woman with the lower body of a snake who fed off of children and men alike, with one example being the Lamia of Libya, being believed to have been a daughter of Poseidon, as well as the mother of the monster Scylla. Additionally, this fear of the unknown and of the murky depths would further the belief that many of the mermaids during the medieval and even Renaissance period were really sea witches, creatures that used their magic to conjure storms and steal away the lives and souls of men. But more on that in a minute. As for mermen, their earliest and more romanticized depictions and associations began with the Triton of Greek myth, as explained earlier, who over time received nearly the same kind of treatment as the mermaids did, with many of them being changed to resemble more fish than man. Even though the majority of mermen would come to be called Tritons or Tritoni, they were still synonymous with the Greek god. As for the Northern Europeans and those around the British Isles, mermen were often portrayed with gnarled green hair, jagged teeth, and even scaly skin. Think Old Greg, if you're old like I am. In opposition to this, some Scandinavian lore illustrates mermen as a man more so than a fish, with the man having long black hair and a long beard, which showed their traditional connection to the ancient waters and understanding of the wisdom that it brought. That said, one interesting depiction of mermen, Conrad Gessner's 1558 encyclopedia, Historia Animalium, he describes the sea satyr as a monstrous chimera that was part man, part fish, and part goat, sharing that this creature swam through the waters throughout Crete, tormenting man and fish alike that came across the monster. Of course, this view may have really just been an entertaining idea, as creatures of this sort were quite popular throughout Europe and Asia during this time period, as many were capitalizing on legends and stories that they had heard about. Thankfully, our time here in Atlantica doesn't depict Ariel nor Triton as these unsettling creatures of myth, but instead presents them as more human, which, given their mythology, is fitting, as many Greeks viewed their gods and goddesses as being akin to humans, with many of these divinities sharing human qualities like hubris, anger, sadness, and even happiness. And looking at both Ariel and King Triton, a demigod and a god respectively, their personalities and attitudes fully express their human nature, almost making us forget that they are, in fact, mythical creatures. I'd also like to add that I'm of the firm belief that Ariel and Hercules are cousins, as King Triton's father is Poseidon, who is the brother of Zeus, so really making Ariel Hercules' first cousin once removed, if I've got that right. But getting back on topic, something I find incredibly important with all this, not only here in Atlantica, but within Kingdom Hearts proper, is the fact that King Triton and Ariel are parent and child. This is important as parents and parental figures within Kingdom Hearts are crucial to the overall story, and this world is probably the best place to discuss this kind of topic. Now, looking at the dynamic between King Triton and Ariel, we're forced to watch as the two clash at nearly every turn. But through this, we can see that both deeply care for one another, And even though both do make mistakes, they own up to them by the end and make a real effort to correct those mistakes, which is extremely touching, given that when looking at other relationships between a parent and their child throughout this game, this is truly a human moment. I think it's also worth mentioning that throughout our time here in Atlantica, Triton is fulfilling his role as a parent to a T, as parents are meant to be protectors and guides for their children so they can grow and become fully functioning adults later on in life. Of course, Triton does get heavy-handed with his methods at times, but even still, by the end of this world, Triton shows his humanity by apologizing to Ariel and nurturing her to live to her heart's desire. This kind of humanizing moment is seen throughout Greek mythology, as the gods were representative of the multiplicity of attitudes and behaviors that make a person human. Many of the gods and goddesses of Greek myth would act out of character and angrily lash out at family members for hurting them. And though there aren't really any depictions of gods reconciling for their actions, seeing it here in Atlantica with both Ariel and Triton apologizing to one another really illustrates that gods and goddesses do have the ability to forgive and fulfill their role as parents, a role that gods and goddesses often play to help nurture and care for their creations, so that they can grow and become what their hearts desire. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, mermaids were oftentimes seen as sea witches who conjured up storms to sink ships and drown any sailor who got too close to their lair. And here in Atlantica, the villain Ursula is one such sea witch who would happily do just that to any unsuspecting sailor in an instant. After losing Triton's trident, we finally get a chance to head into Ursula's domain to reclaim it. And on our way there, we get a very quick look at the entrance into Ursula's lair. And from what I could find, I'm amazed that this lore hasn't been expanded upon further. This creature, according to a singular comic of The Little Mermaid, is known as the Serpentine, and in the early days of Atlantica, a rival kingdom of Mores used this Leviathan as a form of entertainment within a labyrinth, devouring any poor unfortunate soul it came across. Now, if you're any familiar with Greek myth, you can probably surmise that this bit of lore is inspired by the story of the Minotaur within the labyrinth. In it, the Minotaur was the son of the Cretan bull and Queen Pasiphae of Crete, who was locked away in the labyrinth for years, devouring the bodies of sacrificial Athenians until Theseus ventured in and slew the beast. Unfortunately for the Serpentine, it appears to have met the same fate as the Minotaur, and was slain and then given as a gift to Ursula. Furthermore, this giant serpentine acts as Ursula's lair, which may also be a slight nod to Jonah and the fish, but more than likely is an homage to the biblical Leviathan, the primordial sea serpent of chaos within Hebrew myth. Now, I've previously discussed the Leviathan and even the whale of Jonah at length back when we were inside of Monstro. Yeah, I could have phrased that a little bit better. But in brief, this primeval creature was the epitome of suffering and chaos within the world. And as an antagonist to the Hebrew god Yahweh, the massive sea serpent would be subsequently struck down in a fierce fight. In the end, Leviathan would be dismantled and provided as sustenance for Yahweh's followers as they celebrated the end of the chaos. And as the original story of The Little Mermaid was a Christian tale, it's only fitting that the villain of this world would make her home inside the physical representation of chaos and disorder, as the Sea Witch does everything in her power to dismantle Triton's rule so that she can rule with chaos over all of Atlantica. So before we go any further into Ursula's mythology, I like to mention that this depiction of a person with the body of an octopus is, at least in my research, not a thing in actual myth. Sucks, I know, but from what I can tell, this, what I believe is dubbed Caecilia, appears to be a more modern and twisted interpretation of the mermaid mythos. And looking at both Donald and Ursula collectively, told you I'd get back to Donald, we can see that this portrayal is meant to show the player and the audience that this version of the mermaid is, in a physical sense, an outsider. It's this view of them as outsiders that furthers the fact that our oceans have held such a sense of wonder and mysticism within it for thousands of years. It's for this reason that Donald and Ursula are depicted in this manner, as they are both predominantly magic users. In myth, Hekate, the Greek goddess of witchcraft and of the seas, is a prominent figure within Greek worship, as her presence helped explain the appearance of magic and of transformations within the world. And much like Ursula having Flotsam and Jetsam at her side, Hekate had familiars that were not only associated with her, but frequently stayed by her side. The first was the she-dog Hekate, who was once a queen of Troy, but was subsequently transformed when she jumped into the sea. Hecate's second familiar was the polecat, who was believed to be either the witch Gale or the midwife Galantheus, who was transformed by Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, and taken in by Hekate. What's more is that Hecate's name in Greek means worker from afar, as her magic allowed her to act upon mortals and gods alike without getting too close to them, connecting the goddess to Ursula as the sea witch plots and acts against King Triton from a distance throughout our time in Atlantica, using her schemes to overpower Triton and rule the seas herself. I think it's also worth noting that witchcraft and the use of magic throughout the centuries have been mythicized and seen as an evil or malevolent force to a growing populace. This kind of view on magic has led to many in power to mistakenly view things beyond their understanding as sorcery or witchcraft. Finally, I had previously mentioned that both the Little Mermaid and the gang's journey through Atlantica shared a theme of transformation, as both see our main characters change their forms to fit into a world that isn't their own. This kind of theming parallels the thousands of stories that have been told throughout the ages in relation to the mysticism of our oceans. Now, there are too many to mention here, but some include the Yangtze goddess who transforms into a Baiji Dolphin when she jumped into the river, Achilles who had become nearly invincible when dipped into the river Styx, and even Grendel's mother in the story of Beowulf, who is confronted in her underwater lair deep in the murky depths. Each of these stories are vastly different, but each share a connection to the mystical nature of water throughout the centuries, and in turn, giving water itself a transformative quality. Again, in Greek myth, the enchantress Circe is a transformative figure who is often associated with water, and even who, on numerous occasions, used both her magic and potions to transform people into animals or monsters. In one notable story, Circe became enraged by the sea god Glaucus, who did not reciprocate her love and, in an act of revenge, had poisoned and transformed Glaucus's lover, Scylla, from a beautiful nymph into a beast of the ocean. The same Scylla who sat opposite to Charybdis along the Strait of Messina that Odysseus had to sail past. And much like Ursula, Scylla was an incredible and chaotic force that struck fear into the hearts of sailors. And it's here that we see just how powerful magic can be in its connection to the primordial waters, as Atlantica is the first world in our journey to actively change our gang's appearance and affect nearly every aspect of gameplay. transforming our approach to better fit this watery world. So, with as many times as I've played through Atlantica and talked about it with so many people, I've heard it time and time again that this world is just empty and devoid of life. That throughout our time here under the sea, nothing really happens. That all you do is just go back and forth between zones until you eventually find yourself facing off against Ursula. And to that, I can see what they mean by it, as the first area you enter is bigger than any other we've been in yet. And it's a little overwhelming at first to explore. But to say that there's nothing here, I think is a little far-fetched. Yes, it's a vast and open space, but considering the fact that our oceans are massive and are just filled with water and sand at points, it doesn't really feel so empty in comparison. Especially with the fact that throughout the ages, many have viewed the immensity of the ocean as a source of magic and of wonder. And with this thought, you can start to see just how incredible this world really is. It's a world of magic and transformation that continues the ethos of Kingdom Hearts. That our connections to one another, be it through our friends and family, is the magic of our lives. That following our hearts can bring light into the darkness and transform us for the better. And that's another world under our belt. And to be honest with you, I never expected to enjoy it as much as I did with this exploration. But if you've enjoyed this exploration and want to learn more, then consider showing your support by joining our community of gamers and historians, many of whom, like Sarah Smith, DMT Infinity, Eric Groth, and Vegard Arntzen, continue to be amazing gamers who go above and beyond for this channel. So if you'd like to join them, then be sure to subscribe and even head over to the Patreon. Links are all in the description. But with that, I want to say thank you so very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.